Today we are going over the top 5 wrongful convictions that shook the justice system. Sit back, grab a snack and hit the subscribe button. 5. The Central Park 5, 1989. In the spring of 1989, the brutal assault and rape of a jogger in Central Park shocked New York City. Police quickly turned their attention to 5 Black and Latino teenagers, aged 14 to 16, who had been in the park that night. Despite a lack of physical evidence linking them to the crime, detectives coerced confessions from the boys through intense interrogation tactics. These confessions, riddled with inconsistencies, became the focal point of the prosecution's case. The 5 teenagers, Kevin Richardson, Raymond Santana, Antron McCrae, Yusef Salam, and Corey Wise, were tried and convicted largely based on their confessions, receiving sentences that ranged from 5 to 15 years in prison. The case garnered national attention and heightened racial tensions, framing these boys as dangerous criminals in the public eye. Years later, in 2002, convicted serial rapist Matias Reyes came forward, confessing to the crime and providing DNA evidence that confirmed his guilt. The DNA evidence not only excluded the boys but also pointed directly to Reyes. In 2003, the convictions of the Central Park 5 were vacated, and they were awarded settlements for their wrongful convictions. The case remains a poignant example of how bias, inequality, and aggressive policing can lead to grave miscarriages of justice. 4. The West Memphis 3, 1993. In May 1993, 3 8-year-old boys, Stevie Branch, Michael Moore, and Christopher Byers, were found dead in a wooded area in West Memphis, Arkansas. The horrific nature of the crime led to a frantic investigation. Local law enforcement became fixated on 3 young men, Damian Eccles, Jason Baldwin, and Jesse Miskelly, who were perceived as different due to their interest in heavy metal music and an alternative lifestyle. Despite the absence of substantial evidence linking them to the crime, police interrogated Miskelly for hours, yielding a confession rife with contradictions. The prosecution exploited this confession, along with the teens' alternative lifestyle, portraying them as Satan worshippers responsible for the murders. The trial was marred by sensationalism and a distinct lack of forensic evidence connecting any of the accused to the crime scene. In 1994, Eccles was sentenced to death while Baldwin received a life sentence and Miskelly was sentenced to 40 years. For years, the case attracted attention from supporters and filmmakers who believed in the trio's innocence. The case would remain open and controversial until new DNA testing methods were employed, showing no trace of the men at the crime scene. In 2011, after almost 18 years of imprisonment, the West Memphis 3 took an Alford plea, allowing them to assert their innocence while acknowledging that the state had enough evidence to convict them. The case remains emblematic of wrongful convictions in the face of societal prejudice and investigative failures. 3. The Murder of Elizabeth Short, 1947. The murder of Elizabeth Short, better known as the Black Dahlia, in January 1947 is one of the most notorious unsolved cases in American history. The gruesome discovery of her dismembered body in a vacant lot in Los Angeles sparked immense media frenzy. Detectives quickly began their investigation, but their focus soon fell on sensational theories rather than objective evidence. The LAPD's investigation was plagued with missteps, from sloppy handling of evidence to yielding to the sensationalist nature of the media, resulting in dozens of false leads and a long string of suspects. At the time, numerous individuals claimed responsibility for the murder, while some detectives were swayed by witnesses with dubious credibility. The pursuit of notoriety and public attention overshadowed the facts of the case. Despite extensive media coverage and numerous suspects being brought to light, Elizabeth Short's murder remained unsolved for decades, with detectives often going down rabbit holes that led nowhere. The case remains a chilling emblem of how the pursuit of sensationalism can derail thorough investigations and leave families without closure. 2. The wrongful conviction of Ronald Cotton, 1984. In 1984, a young woman named Jennifer Thompson was violently raped in North Carolina. During the traumatic experience, she made a considerable effort to memorize her attacker's features. After the attack, she identified Ronald Cotton, a man she had erroneously recognized from her photo lineup, as her assailant. Police arrested Cotton, who maintained his innocence throughout the trial, but Jennifer's compelling testimony led to his conviction. Cotton was sentenced to 11 years in prison. Throughout his incarceration, he fought to prove his innocence, while Thompson struggled to reconcile her misidentification, which haunted her. In 1995, DNA testing not only exonerated Cotton but also identified the real rapist, Bobby Poole, a man who had a history of similar crimes. The wrongful conviction of Ronald Cotton became a landmark case in the movement against eyewitness misidentification, and emphasized the need for reform in police procedures regarding identification techniques. Though Cotton was exonerated, the emotional fallout lingered for both him and Thompson, as their lives had been irrevocably altered by the flawed detection methods of the time. Their story later became a powerful narrative on the limitations of human memory and how statistical evidence outweighs testimonials in matters of crime. 1. The Case of Adnan SED 1999. The 1999 murder of Hae Min Lee and Baltimore ex-boyfriend, Adnan SED. The case gained unprecedented attention years later through the podcast Serial, which illuminated numerous inconsistencies in the investigation and trial process. At the trial, the prosecution based its case primarily on Syed's supposed motive and cell phone records that painted a picture of his movements that day. However, substantial evidence was either overlooked or misrepresented. Syed maintained his innocence, claiming he was in a different location at the time of the crime. Witnesses who could corroborate his alibi were not interviewed by his defense attorney. The forensic evidence was also questionable, and the unreliable cell tower data used against him raised doubts about its validity. Years of legal battles ensued, with Syed's case gradually gaining momentum in the justice system. In 2016, the Maryland Court of Special Appeals found several deficiencies in his defense, and in 2022, after nearly 23 years of imprisonment, Syed was exonerated when prosecutors stated they lacked confidence in the integrity of his conviction. The case not only questions the efficacy of the investigative techniques, but also sheds light on the systemic flaws that can lead to wrongful convictions, highlighting the urgent need for reform in the legal system.